Rob Hall reached the summit of Everest, and that decision killed him. Rob Hall, May 10th, 1996, Mount Everest, South Col route. Rob Hall was 35 years old, a professional mountain guide from New Zealand and one of the most experienced climbers on Mount Everest. He had already reached the summit 4 times. This climb was supposed to be another routine success. Hall was leading a commercial expedition called Adventure Consultants. His client was Doug Hansen, a 46-year-old mailman from Seattle. Doug had failed to reach the summit the year before. This time, he had spent everything he had to try again. Another commercial expedition, Mountain Madness, led by American guide Scott Fisher, was also attempting the summit the same day. Together, both teams had dozens of climbers on a single route. Each client had paid $65,000 for one thing: a chance to stand on the top of the world. May 10th, 1996 became one of the busiest summit days in Everest history. The climb started before sunrise, but problems began early. At the Hillary Step, a narrow rock wall just below the summit, the safety ropes were not set up. They should have been fixed hours earlier. Instead, climbers were forced to wait. Dozens of people stood still in the death zone. The rule was clear: reach the summit early, turn around by 2 p.m. no matter what. Above 26,000 feet is the death zone. The air is so thin that the human body slowly shuts down. Stay too long and you do not come back. By 2 p.m., Rob Hall should have turned everyone around. But Doug Hansen was still below the summit, exhausted and moving slowly. Hall made a choice. He stayed. At 4 p.m., 2 hours past the safe limit, Doug Hansen reached the summit. Rob Hall was right beside him. That decision sealed what came next. As they descended, the weather collapsed without warning. A violent storm hit Everest. Winds reached 70 miles per hour. Temperatures dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius. Visibility disappeared. Doug ran out of oxygen near the south summit. He could no longer move. Rob Hall tried to pull him down, tried to talk him through each step. Doug collapsed. Hall refused to leave his client. Throughout the night, Rob Hall radioed base camp. He was freezing, blinded by snow, still clipped to the mountain. Rescue climbers tried to reach him. They got close. The storm forced them back. By morning, Doug Hansen was dead. On the morning of May 11th, rescue teams managed to reach them. Rob Hall was barely conscious. His final radio call was not for help. It was to his pregnant wife, Jan, in New Zealand. He told her he loved her. He told her to take care of their unborn daughter. Then, the radio went silent. Rob Hall died on May 11th, 1996, at 28,700 feet on Mount Everest, still beside his client. 8 people died during the 1996 Everest disaster. It became one of the deadliest days in the mountain's history.
David Sharp, May 15th, 2006. Mount Everest, South Col route. A climber was found sitting inside a small rock cave on Mount Everest, just above Camp 4, at an altitude of 27,890 feet. He was alive, but barely. His name was David Sharp. David Sharp was 34 years old, from England. He was not an amateur climber. Before Everest, he had already climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Elbrus, and Cheruiyot, an 8,000-meter peak. Everest was not a random dream for him. It was unfinished business. This was David's 3rd attempt. In 2003, frostbite forced him to turn back. In 2004, he climbed to within 1,148 feet of the summit, then gave up. Not because he collapsed, but because time ran out. That distance stayed with him. So in 2006, David came back with one goal: climb Mount Everest without bottled oxygen. He chose the hardest way possible. No Sherpa guide, no climbing partner, no radio, no team monitoring his position. He carried only 2 oxygen bottles, strictly for emergencies. Once those were gone, there was no backup plan. Late on May 14th, David left Camp 4 at 26,000 feet. Above this point is the death zone. There is only 1/3 the oxygen found at sea level. Your body cannot recover here. Your brain slowly shuts down. Other climbers saw David higher on the route. He was moving slowly, silently, completely alone. Nobody knows if he reached the summit. There were no photos, No radio calls, no witnesses. What is known is what happened on the way down. David began to fail. The cold drained his strength. Lack of oxygen clouded his judgment. His emergency oxygen was gone. Near 27,890 feet, he reached a shallow rock hollow beside the climbing route. Climbers call it Green Boots Cave, named after another climber who died there in 1996, identified only by his bright green boots. It is not a camp. There is no oxygen there, no rescue equipment. Just a place climbers stop for a minute to escape the wind. David sat down inside. At that altitude, sitting down is deadly. Your muscles lock. Your blood thickens. Hypothermia numbs fear. Hypoxia convinces your brain that resting will help. It never does. Early in the morning on May 15th, Turkish climbers reached the cave. Inside, they found David Sharp. He was alive, barely conscious, unable to stand. They gave him oxygen, tried to wake him, tried to lift him. His body did not respond. At nearly 28,000 feet, dragging a grown man means killing yourself. They made a decision and continued down. As daylight came, more climbers passed the cave. David remained sitting inside. Later that morning, New Zealand climber Mark Inglis reached him. David's eyelashes were frozen. Icicles hung from his face. Oxygen was offered again. David refused or could not understand. Inglis continued upward. Throughout the day, climbers walked past the cave. Some looked inside. Some stopped briefly. Most assumed the man was already dead. He wasn't. By the end of the day, over 40 climbers had seen David Sharp. In the afternoon, Lebanese climber Maxime Chaya reached the cave. David's face had turned black from frostbite. His eyes were open but empty. His body was frozen into a sitting position. Chaya stayed as long as he could. Then the calculation became unavoidable. Staying longer meant 2 deaths instead of 1. Chaya left. David Sharp died on May 15, 2006, at 27,890 feet, inside Green Boots Cave. His body remained there for years, frozen beside the route. When the story became public, the reaction was global outrage. Even Sir Edmund Hillary, the first person to climb Mount Everest, publicly criticized what happened.
Joshua Cheruiyot, May 22, 2024, near Bishop Rock, 160 feet below the summit. Joshua Cheruiyot was a 40-year-old banker from Kenya. He was attempting something no African climber had ever achieved before. Joshua's goal was to reach the summit of Mount Everest without using bottled oxygen. Less than 2% of climbers ever attempt this. Most do not survive. Joshua was not inexperienced. He had reached the summit of Mount Kenya more than 20 times. He climbed Mount Kilimanjaro in just 15 hours. In 2023, he became the first African to summit Manaslu, the world's 8th highest mountain, without oxygen. On May 22, 2024, Joshua left Camp 4 at 26,000 feet with his Sherpa guide, Nwang. Above this height is the death zone. Joshua had strict rules. He would not use oxygen unless he passed out or the weather became extreme. Nwang carried an emergency oxygen bottle, but Joshua was determined to finish the climb without it. As they climbed higher, Joshua began to deteriorate. Near Bishop Rock, just 160 feet below the summit, something went wrong. Joshua became confused. He stopped responding clearly. He refused to listen to instructions. Nwang tried to give him the emergency oxygen. Joshua said no. He was closer to history than almost anyone ever gets, but his body was shutting down. Back at base camp, radio contact became unclear. The last transmission was broken and difficult to understand. It sounded like they were in trouble. Then, communication stopped. Rescue teams searched for days in worsening weather. When they finally found Joshua, his body was discovered in a crack in the ice, still 160 feet below the summit. He had died trying to reach the top. Nwang, the Sherpa who stayed with him, was never found. He disappeared while trying to help Joshua. Joshua Cheruiyot died on May 22, 2024, in the death zone of Mount Everest.